You're listening to the Blind Tiger Record Club podcast, where we champion music of all genres, and we believe vinyl is king.
For a dying man, I feel pretty good, I feel pretty good. For a righteous man, I'll do what I should, do what I should. For a fallen man, I'll get up again, I'll get up again. For a dying man, I feel pretty good. Oh, we're born to trouble as the sparks fly high. Born to trouble as the sparks fly. It's alright. In the light, I see you glowing. It's alright. In the light, I see you glowing.
Well, welcome back to Season 2 of the Blind Tiger Record Club podcast. This is one of our club episodes that we call the 45. I am David Williams, and I'm here with Rudy Newman.
Hey, Dave.
If you've listened to us for long, you know that when we do an episode of the 45, it's our club episodes where we introduce you to several new albums in a shorter format. We normally do 2 of these per month. One focuses on our records of the month, and one focuses on new store additions. Our longer format interview episodes are going to be starting back this month, so we're really excited about that. And on those episodes, we have one artist who will come on and we'll discuss one album. So today, we're going to tell you about our September Records of the Month. If you're not familiar with our club, subscribing members choose from 6 styles each month. Those are the Records of the Month, and today we're going to discuss all 6 of those albums. You don't have to be a member of the Blind Tiger Record Club to enjoy the 45. It's really just a great way to discover new music and some albums that you may not be familiar with. All of these albums are available for purchase at theblindtigerrecordclub.com. So Rudy, let's drop the needle and take a quick listen to the Blind Tiger Record Club's September Records of the Month. So the first album we're going to talk about is Drew Holcomb and the Neighbors' new album, Dragons. Now, Drew is a dear friend of mine, so I'm naturally biased on all of his releases, but I genuinely feel that Drew is one of the most important voices in Americana music today. Dragons is Drew Holcomb's and the Neighbors' 7th original studio album, not counting, his solo albums and a couple of Christmas albums. So let's just jump right into this album and play the first single. This was the teaser song released in advance of the album. My family absolutely loves this song, especially my adopted son, Toby. This is the song, Family.
Laughing in the rain, it ain't always pretty, can drive you insane. I got the keys to the kingdom, take it out of our car. All 4 seasons, well bless your heart.
So Drew is an artist that I believe will have immense career longevity. I think eventually he'll reach kind of iconic status in the folk Americana circles that he plays in. Just every album he releases continues to show his growth as an artist. Up to this point, he's really had 2 career-defining albums. The first pivotal album, in my humble opinion, was the last album I was blessed to work on with Drew called Chasing Someday.
Oh, I was going to ask why you would say that. Now I understand. Okay.
Well, that album was the first and only album Drew has released to date where he actually partnered with an outside label. Mm-hmm. Everything else has been on his own label, Magnolia Records. The album was released in February of 2011 on Dual Tone Records. And Dual Tone at the time, it was just a small label in East Nashville, and they were amazing to work with. Still count them as dear friends today. But later that year, Dual Tone would release the Lumineers' Ho Hey, and pretty much everything changed for them after that.
Started the old stomp clap genre.
Yeah, and so that was later in 2011, and so the first part of 2011, we were working on them with Drew's record, Chasing Someday. The album had a song on it called Live Forever. And I still remember the first show where Drew played that song. I pretty much flipped out and told him that I thought it was a hit.
Nice.
After it was recorded, we put it out with a company that places songs on digital services, that plays music at restaurants, retail stores, hotel lobbies. It's just kind of like there in the background
Yeah.
over the speakers. And at the time, it was right before the basketball season for the NBA, and the song was literally playing in the lobby of a random hotel. And I don't know, I can't remember now if he was a producer for TNT or if he worked with the NBA, but whatever his job was, he was putting together a promo spot that was going to run to kick off the NBA season for 2011-2012. And that spot, was basically where they had digitally put all these classic, like, old players from all these different generations, and they had, kind of like merged the film together so it looked like they were playing with current players,
like
and so
between
you had
old and
people
new
that
footage.
never were on the court together that were looked like they
Looks
were
like they're
guarding
playing
each
in a
other.
game.
And
That's
so
awesome.
I think he literally Shazammed the song, and pretty much in the next week we were negotiating its use on what became known as the NBA Forever video.
That's great.
So that video took off and gave Drew really some of his biggest exposure to that point. Chasing Someday was Drew Holcomb and the Neighbors' first album to break into Billboard 200. It went number 3 on Heat Seekers, number 8 on Folk, number 19 on the Indie chart. They also went on kind of the heaviest touring cycle, I think, since they had been formed. They played over 400 shows in support of that album, and they started selling out venues in several markets. So, from a touring standpoint, this album and that tour really is, call it like the band's first venue jump, because following that touring cycle, in some markets they were having to play larger rooms, or if in some markets they were playing rooms they were just filling to capacity now.
Yeah.
And so that album, it wasn't just because I was working on it with them. It was also, I think it's a very pivotal point in their career.
You just happen to be attached.
Yeah. So the second pivotal album I was not involved with was 2015's Medicine. This album really, to this day still, is Drew's highest performing album on Billboard. It broke into the 200 at number 47. It was number 6 on Folk, number 12 on Rock, and number 23 on Digital, and number 14 on Indie. He performed on Jimmy Kimmel in support of that, which is, again, it was like one of the first like kind of national big exposures he had since
stage.
the NBA thing. Then he went on a major U.S. tour with Need to Breathe. And so,
Nice.
This was really probably where critics started taking note of him. And I feel like this album, you could say, well, it was the most critically well received. But the reality was, I don't think it wasn't that other albums hadn't fared well. They just wouldn't pay attention.
Who knew?
And now they were starting
There's
to pay attention.
and see him.
And that record is actually a really good record. And so I would say that's probably like the next kind of pivotal album point for him. I honestly feel The Dragons could be his third most important release so far. It debuted at number 171 on the Billboard 200, and that was on the first charting of the album. So, there could be some other drivers that come along and even move that up in the chart.
Yeah.
It also debuted at number 3 on Folk, is number 30 on Rock, number 5 on Indie, and number 3 on Vinyl. So let's go ahead and listen to a second track off of Dragons. This is his song, End of the World.
Hey, it's the end of the world now. Haven't you heard? So smoke 'em if you got 'em. Boys and girls, say goodbye to the past now. Raise up your glass and revel while it lasts. It's the end of the world. Sometimes I am afraid to die. My flesh and bones won't testify. My enemies and friends share the same residence. But don't eulogize on my behalf. I'm a long way from my epitaph. I'm only getting started on this lost highway. I am brave and I am not afraid. Hey, it's the end of the world now. Haven't you heard? So smoke 'em if you got 'em. Boys and girls, say goodbye to the past now. Raise up your glass and revel while it lasts. It's the end of the world.
So Drew did a video for that song, and it takes place in a zombie apocalypse. It's a really great video. You should watch it, listen to the lyrics, because it all kind of gets juxtaposed against this real cheery and kind of upbeat melody in the chorus.
Yeah, that's great.
You know, I haven't talked to Drew specifically about this song, but I have a feeling it's kind of like, maybe you would call it an anti-protest song. Like,
Sure.
it's kind of like, hey, let's stop all the arguing and just hang out.
Yeah.
So, you know, one of the big reasons I said that this will be his third kind of career essential album is because it's also one of the most collaborative albums that he's done to date.
Yep.
We mentioned on our B-Sides episode that we did with Case and Cooley that Cooley, you know, is producing this album.
Yeah.
And I really think Kaysen was a great choice for Drew in the band. He's such a strong songwriter. He has such great pop sensibilities. You know, we talked about this when we did the American Authors album. He just really kind of understands how to create these great hooks that are pop driven, hooky, singable songs. And I think this is going to help maybe even, you know, round out and soften and commercialize, for lack of a better word, some of Drew's stuff. So I was real excited, you know, when I found out he was going to be the next producer, and I really think that's going to have a major impact on like why we'll probably see a little bit of
an ascension.
Yes. Yeah. But another thing about this record is he had guest artists featured on this album that are definitely worth mentioning. The first one's not a big surprise. It's his wife, Ellie Holcomb. She was always one of the neighbors in the past, but she's now an established solo artist, so she's not necessarily always on tour with them and is not necessarily on everything he records. So she's featured on a couple of these songs. Mm-hmm. Singer-songwriter Lori McKenna co-wrote and performs on the track "You Want What You Can't Have." She
Which
also
is one of the better ones. I love that
it's
song.
a great song.
Yep.
She also co-wrote on the song "Make It Look So Easy." Americana artist Sean McConnell wrote on "End of the World," and then Nashville songwriter who we've mentioned before, Natalie Hemby. She's also one of the 4 women in the High Women with Brandy Carlisle, and who else is in that?
Maren Morris and Amanda Shires.
Yes. So she's one of the 4, and big songwriter here in town. But she co-wrote
lots of cuts.
Yeah, and so she co-wrote and performed on the song "Maybe." Kaysen Cooley writes and performs on the album, which would be expected. And one of the strongest tracks on the album is the title track, "Dragons." It features guest vocals of the group The Lone Bellow. So let's go ahead and listen to that track, and then we'll come back and talk about it. This is "Dragons."
I was climbing a mountain, asleep in the moonlight. The ghost of my grandpa came to me in a dream. As the stars hung above us, he started singing this chorus. He laughed loud as hell and said this to me: take a few chances, a few worthy romances. Go swimming in the ocean on New Year's Day. Don't listen to the critics. Stand up and bear witness. Go slay all the dragons that stand in your way.
That song is amazing. I actually read that. So Drew wrote that song kind of like with his grandpa in mind. He and Zach Williams from the Lone Bellow both kind of had grandpas that, like, you know, were this mythical figure to them. You know, almost like when they were growing up, he was just like a superhero or whatever. So Drew kind of wrote that song, you know, with his grandpa in mind, saying like, you know, that, you know, there's this universal reality that we all wake up every day, and there's, you know, like there's a battle to fight. There's a dragon to be slayed.
Yeah. I mean, I've always admitted that I'm super biased when it comes to Drew, but
yeah, I heard you say that earlier.
I think lyrically, I think he's a great lyricist anyway, but I think this cut in particular is just outstanding lyrically.
Yeah. Also want to mention that this song gives me serious John Prine Paradise vibes. So if you want to listen to those too and see.
I'm sure Drew wouldn't mind that comparison.
No.
Speaking of comparisons, he does draw heavy influence from artists like Springsteen, Tom Waits, Neil Young,
our Heartland heroes.
Yeah, you can hear a lot of that swirled into even that song we just played. I mean, just into Dragons.
Absolutely.
Drew and his band kind of carry on these influences in a way that I think only really seasoned artists do. It's, we've talked about this with other artists. There's a difference between kind of reflecting like those influences versus like emulating, and
absolutely.
I think if anything, they're just like these moments of reflection where you can go, oh, I hear a bit of that, or I can see how his phrasing, he really listened to a lot of Tom Waits or something like that. But it's done so well, and they're so seasoned in it now that it just becomes them.
Yeah, it's still a Drew Holcomb composition.
I mean, it's the Drew Holcomb and the Neighbors sound, and it's become their own distinctive thing.
Yep.
So making up that distinctive sound we're talking about is his backing band, the Neighbors, which consists of longtime bandmates Rich Brinsfield and Nathan Duggar. Also the current drummer, Will Sells, who does all the drums and percussion on this record. I think bottom line, this album is an outstanding addition to Drew Holcomb's and the Neighbors catalog. And before we switch to our next record of the month, let's take in one more track off this album. Let's play the song that Drew wrote and features Lori McKenna. This is You Want What You Can't Have.
Some people want a house on the top of the hill. Some people want people to pay all the bills. Some people want to move on. Some people want to go back in time. Some people buy everything they want. Other people don't have a dime. You want what you can't have since the Garden of Eden. It's been like that. You can't tear down the trees, pull all the weeds. You want what you can't have.
So everyone needs to check out this album. If you're not familiar with Drew Holcomb and the Neighbors, this album is so strong, you really should just start here.
Yeah.
If you are familiar with Drew's music, you should especially check out the beautifully emotional song, You Never Leave My Heart. It's the second to the last track on the album, and it was written about Drew's brother who passed away several years ago, but it's just an incredibly emotionally well-written, beautiful song, so I would definitely say check that out. The version that we're carrying is just the standard
black vinyl.
Standard black vinyl. But it is an amazing album. I can't recommend it highly enough. So if you are a member of our club and you're looking for your pick, this is the singer-songwriter. Make that your choice and get Drew's new album, Dragons. So we leave Drew Holcomb and the Neighbors and go to another Nashville artist, Sheryl Crow. She's our rock record of the month, Sheryl Crow's new album, Threads. And, we talked about how on Drew's album, Dragons, that it's his most collaborative to date. Well, he ain't got nothing on Crow. Her entire album is collaborative. First, let's talk about Sheryl Crow. She's sold over 50 million records worldwide.
Man.
She's been nominated for 32 Grammy Awards, winning 9. She has won Country Music Award. She's won 3 American Music Awards, Billboard Music Award, a Brit, even a People's Choice Award. And she's been nominated for many, many more, like, MTV Music Awards or VH1, Video Awards.
We're talking about a career spanning 20 to 30 years now.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And so this is her 10th studio album. It's 11th if you count her Christmas album. And a few weeks ago, when it streeted, it debuted at number 30 on Billboard 200, number 2 on Country, and number 10 in the UK on their OCC chart.
Wow.
The sales pitch for this album really writes itself.
Absolutely.
When
you start listing the names.
There's 17 songs right out of the gate. You go 17 songs featuring 23 guest artists. And each one's a friend, but whether they're idols or new artists, they're all people that she knows, has played with on the road, co-written with, whatever, through the years.
Picked because she was just like idolized them growing up playing music and wanted to do.
Yeah. We are going to talk about or mention all of the collaborators, but let's start with one that's pretty special. In 1996, Crow released her second album. It was the self-titled album, Sheryl Crow. It had been 3 years since her debut, Tuesday Night Music Club, had been released. And that album's huge success set up this second album big time. The second album featured some of her biggest songs, like If It Makes You Happy and Every Day is a Winding Road. But it also had a song on it called Redemption Day. In 2010, American Recordings released a posthumous album on Johnny Cash. It was the American 6, Ain't No Grave. All the songs were recorded during the same session as another posthumously released album, the American 5, 100 Highways. Cash recorded both albums in the final months before his death. The second track on American 6 is Sheryl Crow's Redemption Day. So for Threads, they take the Cash vocal from the album and work in Crow's to create a new duet. It's a really special moment on this album for sure, and it was officially released as the album's lead single in April. So to introduce this album, here is Johnny Cash and Sheryl Crow singing Redemption Day.
Fire rages in the streets and swallows everything it meets. It's just an image often seen on television. Come leaders, come ye men of great, let us hear you pontificate. Your many virtues laid to waste, and we aren't listening. There is a train that's heading straight to heaven's gate, to heaven's gate. And on the way, child and man and woman wait, watch and wait for Redemption Day.
Yeah, that's a killer song. I watched an interview with Sheryl Crow where she said that she was basically, you know, kind of done with albums after recording that song because, you know, how do you pass having Johnny Cash sing your song?
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
that was it. She was like, I don't think I'm going to do an album anymore.
Yeah. Well, and it really such an amazing moment. It almost makes, as crazy as all the collaborations are on this album, they all just kind of pale in comparison to that one. And that was the lead track kind of setting it up. So, you know, in some ways there's probably a lot of like real high expectations put on this record because of that track.
Yeah.
But you also kind of go, yeah, well, you're not going to be better than that one.
No, that's the one. That's the track here.
Well, every song on this album is a duet like that. So all the artists on the album, they're prominently featured on the tracks that they perform.
Yeah.
So out of 17 tracks on the album, all are written by Crow except 4 of them. When she decides to do a cover, she doesn't choose them lightly. She really swings for the fences, in my opinion, because the covers she chooses to perform include Everything Is Broken, which was written by Bob Dylan, which she performs with Jason Isbell.
Yes.
She does a Rolling Stones song written by Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, which she performs with Richards, called The Worst. That track is a great moment on this album as well. She performs a Chris Christopherson written song that he duets with Crow. And the last cover is an awesome track that was, you know, I think it kind of surprised a lot of people that she just kind of pulled this one out because it's a lesser known song by George Harrison. And on this version, Crow pulled out kind of an unorthodox and amazing group of performers. It features Eric Clapton on guitar and then vocal duet with Sting on part and then Brandi Carlile on part, and all singing with Crow.
Wow.
So, you know, it's one of the strongest on this album to me, and even the song choice really, like I said, is unexpected. So the name of the song is Beware of Darkness, and let's go ahead and listen to that. This is George Harrison's Beware of Darkness.
It can hit you, it can hurt you, make you sore, and what is more, this is not what you are here for. Watch out now, take care, beware of soft shoe shufflers, dancing down the sidewalks as each unconscious sufferer wanders aimlessly. Beware of my
You know, I've read some reviews on this album, and it really seems that some of the writers do not totally know how to categorize and kind of cover this album. I think part of it is there's so many legends on this album that
You feel hard being critical.
Yeah, you feel strange coming out strongly, you know, with this really negative criticism.
Sure.
Because, I mean, good night. I mean,
How are you even qualified?
look at all the people that are on this. Yeah. And I just think they can't touch some of the traditional combos either, because not only do they work, but some of the duets on here, you know, really seem to fit the current version of Sheryl Crow. So, you know, when you hear that Crow has performed, you know, the duets that we mentioned earlier, like with Cash and Christopherson and Richards, that doesn't feel like that much of a stretch for any of that. Like, you know, if I told you that, you'd be like, oh yeah, I could see that happening.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of songs like that are easier for you to wrap your head around. Those combos pretty easy.
Yeah.
There are songs like Tell Me When It's Over, which is Crow and Chris Stapleton. It's a song that she wrote with him as well. There's also Still the Good Old Days featuring Joe Walsh. She performs Prove You Wrong with Stevie Nicks and Maren Morris. And then there's the song Livewire performed with Bonnie Raitt and Mavis Staples. She sings Nobody's Perfect with Emmylou Harris, Flying Bird with James Taylor, and For the Sake of Love with Vince Gill. Even newer artists make sense when it's songs like Cross Creek Road, which features Lucas Nelson on the digital and CD version, and then Margot Price sings it on the vinyl version.
Oh, that's cool.
So,
Interesting.
I think like all those matchups, they feel like absolutely. I'm sure Cheryl's even been friends with them for years. You know, it just feels like they run in the same circle, no surprises. I mean, cool.
Yeah.
Like you hear it and you go, oh, dude, I want to hear that song.
Yeah.
But not surprising. And and like I said too, it's also hard to be too critical because there really are some amazing moments in some of those songs as well.
Yes.
So, but where I think the ones where the critics are having trouble processing are cuts like Story of Everything, where Crow performs with Chuck D and Andra Day and Gary Clark Jr., which, just as a side note, it's not really my favorite track on the album either. But I've also read some pushback on the duets for Don't featuring Lucis and Wouldn't Want to Be Like You featuring St. Vincent. That song in particular, because, you know, it has those rap style verses that Sheryl, I mean, it's borderline rap with Sheryl Crow. And I think that some of the pushback is coming from critics that may be younger and not really in touch with Crow's early work as much, because I think that's right in Crow's wheelhouse. Like, not necessarily
something that she would release on each album, or even
or not even maybe in line with like what she's been doing over the last decade, where she's been in Nashville and she's been doing more singer-songwriter, country, Americana stuff. You know, like that doesn't obviously.
But she was a pop rock artist.
That's the thing.
Out.
If you go back to these earlier albums,
I mean, Every Day is a Winding Road, and any of the songs on that album.
Well, even to the point where she started out as a backup singer for Michael Jackson. I mean, she has a history doing pop with R&B infused stuff. And I actually like that song a lot. I think, as a matter of fact, I want to play that one next. Let's go ahead and play Wouldn't Want to Be Like You. This is Sheryl Crow and St. Vincent.
Money is the Bentley parked on Wall Street. Money is the new friends you make each week. Money is the inside guy at the bank. Money is the yacht right before it sank. Bet you never thought you'd want so much. Bet you never thought that'd be so tough. So you sell your soul for a piece of the pie. Now you can't sleep, so you don't even I wouldn't wanna be like you. I wouldn't wanna be like you. No way. I wouldn't wanna be like you. You tell a lie, you tell a lie, you tell a lie, but that don't make it true.
I know you kind of mentioned that when you saw that video interview where she was kind of saying, hey, I don't think I can record again. That was probably just kind of off the cuff, talking about how great the Johnny Cash track was. But according to Sheryl Crow, this actually may be her last album.
Yes.
She's not retiring. She's just not releasing new albums. She will probably still, she says she's going to continue to write and record new songs. So she's definitely going to continue to tour. But I think she wants to basically be done making full-length records.
Full-length rap, yeah. The album is kind of not, she doesn't see the album as like the most viable, like, release.
Well,
now she's leaning towards
yeah,
singles.
I mean, what this really means is that most of Crow's music, if she sticks to her guns, is going to be digital released and
digital
streaming.
single releases and stuff like that now.
I think there's probably a lot behind this decision. I know she had a negative impression at country radio. And, kind of the dirty little secret in country format is that artists are expected to fly really all over the country and do free shows.
Yeah.
So they do them, I hate to use this word, but it really is almost like a under-the-table payola because the stations get a lot from these shows, and the artists basically have to come in and do what they would normally do, and they get nothing for it. And someone's got to float that, whether it's the label or the artist.
Yeah.
It's got to be paid for, and that's where a lot of the marketing money goes for working a single at country radio. It's extremely expensive. Mm-hmm. And I read an article where she was kind of like, man, I'm not going to go and leave my kids to go do a free show just so that maybe I can get an ad into rotation at 2 or 3 in the morning.
Yes.
That doesn't really do anything to further her career. So
in that same interview that I've referenced a couple times now, like she also said that like everything that she's ever written that has meant something to her has never been played on radio. Like the most important songs to her are like, deep cuts on albums. Yeah. The singles are the singles.
I would probably disagree pretty wholeheartedly about not putting out records. Yeah. But I understand like where she's at, and especially doing the genre that she's kind of in now. Mm-hmm. So, whether this is a farewell album or just the last project, because honestly, it'd be just hard for her to top. Even if she wants to take that route, this could be the last time we discuss a full-length Crow project. So, I have to say, if you're going to retire from recording albums, this was a heck of a fun way to do it. The last song I want to play off this album is a song that Crow wrote with Willie Nelson in mind. Crow's played with him whenever she could over the last 25 years, and I've read in multiple interviews just she loves Willie Nelson. I mean, she really looks up to him. Yeah. And so just a massive amount of even just creative respect, and I think he's influenced her in even like the current music that she's doing. And so she wanted to write a song that Nelson could, in her words, really sink his teeth into. So she wrote Lonely Alone, and on this album she sings it with Nelson. And again, this is a really special moment. I mean, I think it's not only a great song, like they really do sound amazing together on this track.
Yeah, I think it's cool that she's got both Willie and Lucas on this album too. That's really cool.
Let's play this. This is Lonely Alone with Sheryl Crow and Willie Nelson.
I heard you say, bartender, make it strong. If I had to guess, your lover's gone. I don't know you, and you don't know me, but there's no reason to be lonely alone.
Is the sea taken? Do you like this song? Do you tear up when it comes on? You know it's always done the same for me, for there's no reason to be lonely alone. How about a friend that looks like me?
All right, well that wraps up our discussion on Sheryl Crow and her new album Threads.
Yep, that's it's a huge album. It's got a lot of songs on it, so they had to put it on double vinyl. So our version that we've got for our subscribers this month is a double vinyl.
And once again, that's our rock record of the month. So let's switch gears and talk about the alternative record of the month. This is one that Rudy can testify to that I've been waiting for all year.
A while.
This is Barns Courtney's new album, 404. And if you're not familiar with Courtney, he's a singer-songwriter from the UK. He was born in the UK but lived in Seattle for most of his childhood, returning to the UK when he was 15. So he kind of represents both the US and the UK, I guess, but he's at this point he considered himself, probably a natural English citizen.
Yeah.
So, but when he was in the UK, when he went back, he fronted a band in the UK called Sleeper Cell. And then he fronted a band called Dive Bella Dive, and they actually got signed to Island Records. But, this is one of those just tragic stories where they get signed, they record a record that they're super excited about, and then for whatever reason, Island changes their mind, and the album got shelved and has never been released.
I actually read in an interview that Lady Gaga's producer is who they recorded that album with, and for some reason, he was part of the reason why it never got released.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
Well,
something happened there.
Either way, they were dropped, and Courtney found himself a solo artist.
Yes.
So in 2015, he released a song called Glitter and Gold. And it did okay on some shows on the BBC radio. It reached number 1 on the UK Spotify viral chart and number 2 on iTunes Alternative. And that's really what we start to see here is, for whatever reason, Barns Courtney just starts connecting in the world of streaming.
Yeah.
And I mean connecting.
Yeah.
Glitter and Gold has more than 64 million streams on Spotify to date. His next single, Fire, has almost 50 million streams. And they have just blown up globally. And this was all in 2015, 2016. So the impact that those had just in the streaming world ended up getting him a deal at Virgin EMI Universal. And he released his first album that included those songs called The Attractions of Youth.
Yeah.
So, Glitter and Gold barely broke top 40 in the U.S., but the song Fire did pretty amazing at U.S. radio. It went number 3 at AAA and number 18 at Alternative, number 46 at Rock, and number 24 at Rock Airplay overall. So, that brings us up to 2018, and Courtney started releasing new singles. And the first one was a song called 99. That first big track off the new album, 404, which is why I've been waiting for pretty much a year for this record, because I think that song's incredible.
Can't get those hooks out of your head.
So let's just go ahead and listen to that track first. This is Barns Courtney's 99.
We used to sleep all day, talk all night, stay up by the TV light. But when you bathe the deep vein, milky white, wipe the stardust from your eyes. Said, oh, come on, love will be just fine. We're gonna live just like it's 1999.
Man, I love that song. That song went to number 12 at AAA. It went number 7 at Alternative and number 19 at Rock and number 14 at Rock Airplay. So, that was released, as I said, back in 2018, so it was well in advance of this new album.
Yeah. I'm sure that Barnes was pretty surprised on the performance, as far as the Billboard charts, because he had a lot of reservations about releasing that song because it was so sonically different than anything off of the first album, because it had like an added synth part and there wasn't any of that on the first record and everything. So I think it's pretty funny that, that kind of happens with artists sometimes where they're like, oh, I don't know if I should put this out. And then people end up just loving every second of it.
He released another track called Good Thing as a B-side to 99. But that's not really on this record. Then he released a third single in the early part of 2019 titled You and I. And that song went to number 27 at Alternative. So let's go ahead and play that track now. This is the second single off this record. This is You and I.
Suitcase in your hand, wave goodbye to mom and dad. Never thought I would see the back of you. Mixtapes wearing down, crystal ships are sailing out. Now the doors are opening for you. I wanna swim out into the dark night. I wanna melt you down into the stars. I wanna crumble, tumble like a landslide. I wanna live, die wherever you are. Just you and I.
In 2017, after the success of the Attractions of the Youth album, Barnes toured pretty extensively, and I mean, honestly, seemed to open up for everybody. He went out with The Who, The Libertines, Ed Sheeran, The Lumineers, Tom Odell, Blur, The Wombats, and Fitz and the Tantrums.
Fits in the tantrum.
Fitz and the Tantrums.
Fits.
That's what I said. All right. The criticism that kind of comes out on this album is that it sounds more like a mixtape because of that. You know, good songs, just not cohesive as an album.
Yeah.
And I can see this point slightly, but I don't really feel like it's quite that extreme.
When I listen through the album, I feel like the sequencing is fine.
Yeah, I do
feel
too,
like it
yeah.
fits, and I don't feel like anything is out of place.
I only see that point because I'm listening to what they're saying, reading the review, and
Yeah.
then going, okay, and kind of looking at it through their lens.
For sure.
But you know, bottom line, like, look, this is a sophomore album, so he is a young artist and he's still growing and he's expanding his sound. But that's really all this is that people are referencing. It's just, you know, it should be different.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, it's a natural evolution. He wrote down with his writing partner, I think his name is Sam Battles, and
Yeah.
they basically said like
Who is a big synth player, which is also one of the reasons
why that's
yeah,
more
yeah.
more prevalent in this album. But Barnes said, I want to write what I feel, you
Yeah.
know, and
Well, look, he's been out on the road. You know, we mentioned all those bands he's been opening up for. He's been
Ed
honing his
Sheeran,
skills.
the Wombats,
I mean, he's been gleaning ideas and being influenced and seasoned by bands that he's
you're
performing
going to
with.
hear influence,
Absolutely.
and you're going to hear growth if everything's working right.
I mean, it should just be a given that this album's not going to be the same as the first,
Yeah.
based on all that he's done over the last 2 to 3 years.
And you're
getting
talking
ready
about
for
how many
this.
years is in between those original
Right.
songs being written and
Right.
now.
So, you know, in Courtney's own words, he said, to start with, I wanted to make a punk record or a Rolling Stones album, but what came out is a synth-heavy sound of 404. To do anything else wouldn't have worked. It's a strange amalgamation of influences based on everywhere I've been and some places I haven't. So, you know, just point in case, I mean, that's all this is. And so, some of my favorite songs on this album really are the ones that are much more rock and probably go to that, you know, when he's saying I was trying to make a punk Rolling Stone
Sure.
album.
Because you can hear that, yeah. There's
Absolutely.
like faster drum parts and things like that, and just rocking riffs, you know, on the guitar.
Yeah. Well, he has a song called Fun Never Ends, which is just a straightforward alternative rock song to me. But one of the best songs on this record, in my opinion, is another rock track called London Girls. So let's play that one next. You'll hear that this one's a little bit different than the other ones we've played. This is London Girls.
London girls all fight the same. I should have cut my hair and changed my name. I should have told that girl to leave it home when she was shouting down the telephone. Darling, do you feel alright? 'Cause you've been lighting up my phone all night. And now your voice is ringing in my head. 'Cause she's a London girl. She's a London girl.
So Courtney, you know, gets the album title from the 404 error message that pops up online when a blank page comes up when you've been searching for something.
Yeah.
And, you know, he ties it to the idea of life coughing up its own error messages and the feelings of loss experienced in those moments. And so Rolling Stone described the album as a stomping, swaggering, rock and roll balancing act, teetering between blinding light and total darkness. So that is 404 by Courtney Barnes. And
Barns Courtney.
Did it?
You did it.
I did it. So, you know, Courtney is currently touring clubs in the U.S. So you actually, over the next like 2 to 3 months, it's a great chance if you pull up his website, you can check out tour dates. He's pretty much all over, and they're smaller dates. So
Yeah, I think we're
it'd be
going to
a
have
great
a
way
chance
to
to check
see
him
him
out next month here
Yep.
in Nashville.
Actually, I think it's next week.
Or next week.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, let's wrap that one up. That is another standard.
Standard black vinyl.
Yeah.
Getting back to basics this month.
Yeah. So the next album we're going to talk about is our jazz, soul, and blues pick for the month, and it is Ray Charles and Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music. You know, Ray Charles is literally one of the most iconic artists of all time. So there's so much that you could cover with him you could easily do an entire podcast series just on Ray Charles and probably not get to it
month, a year long.
Yeah. So for today, we're just going to focus all of our comments on this one album.
We're just going to focus on 1950 through 1960. So,
no, just 62.
Okay,
just 62.
fine. Just 62.
So Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music was recorded in 1962. And later that same year, they recorded Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music Volume 2, which by default made the first issue, Volume 1, even though it wasn't titled that. Since the release of these two albums, they've reissued the original multiple times with different variations featuring bonus tracks, or sometimes they just take Volume 1 and 2 and combine it together. But for some reason, like, it always seems to have the cover art of the original album. So it can be really confusing when you're looking at this record as to what was there.
Because they might just add the text Volume 1 and 2.
Sometimes they do that. Sometimes they don't
either.
even do that. Sometimes and there will be an asterisk and you'll see that there's 4 songs off of Volume 2, but not the whole set.
All,
So what we're going to be talking about today and the album that we have in our Jazz Soul Blues pick this month is actually the original release. It had 12 tracks, and it's a pretty pivotal record for the history of music, to be honest. So, up to this point, Charles had just recorded mostly R&B. I think he had a few songs that had started to pop crossover before he did this album, but he had been at Atlantic Records. He left them, and now this album was being recorded for ABC Paramount Records. And this was honestly a pretty big departure from the music he had been doing up to this point. The album featured country, folk, and Western standards, all reworked to fit Charles' style, rearranged to basically fit, more of a pop, jazz, R&B format.
Yes.
But the country
it's not a traditional covers album where it's like,
right.
very similar. No, these are completely reworked songs.
Yep. And so, just to kind of get things going here, the first single released off this album was a song called Born to Lose. It was made famous originally by Ted Daffin. Here is Born to Lose.
Born to lose, I've lived my life in vain. Every dream has only brought me pain. All my life I've always been so blue. Born to lose, and now I'm losing you.
The album was instantly a hit record. It sold 500,000 copies in the U.S. alone. And it also helped Ray Charles continue to cross over to the pop charts. And honestly, it's one of the pivotal albums in setting him up in the icon that he would become. It went to number 1 on the U.S. pop charts, and it stayed there for 14 weeks straight.
Amazing.
It went to number 6 on the U.K. albums chart. So, Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music was Ray Charles' 18th album, and Sid Feller was the producer and A&R director for this album, which isn't, when we talk about producer a lot of times on the show, is not the same thing back then.
Okay.
His job was more just kind of coordinating stuff and doing what Ray kind of wanted done.
Gotcha.
For the most part. And so one of the things that he did to help get ready for this record was he went to a couple of different publishing houses here in Nashville, and he worked with them and ended up compiling 250 songs. But he didn't want to just give them to Ray Charles, because if there was a demo of them, it would have been a very country Nashville-style demo. And so he literally reworked 250 songs in a way that he thought Ray Charles would want to sing them.
Present them to him?
Yeah.
Amazing.
And then he went through and picked 12 out of 250. And then Charles, went ahead and massively reworked them himself. He rearranged them. He brought in jazz arrangers and sent them his notes and said, this is what I want to do, and had them compose the pieces for the rest of the band.
String arrangements.
So, that was just the beginning process, was getting those songs. But they all came from Nashville publishers, every one of them.
That's
and
awesome.
When he finished reworking the songs, That was when they kind of went in and sat down and brought his band in, and then they cut all these new versions of these songs. So the second single off this album was a song called Careless Love, which was basically a very traditional Western song. It's been covered by a lot of artists through the years, but none like Ray Charles. So here he is performing that track. This is Careless Love.
I said love, oh love, oh careless love. Love, please tell me what have I done for you to hurt me all in fun? Well, you know that I once was blind, but now I see.
You know, there's a lot of historical significance to this album as well. It was 1962, and a black singer-songwriter doing country standards was another challenge to the racial barriers of the time.
Yep.
He didn't just sing them, he integrated soul into the songs and really changed them. So, you know, I mean, this was at the height of the civil rights movement. So the fact that it happened and then was so well accepted, I think not only says a lot about Ray Charles and his ability to draw on the American public, but I also think it speaks to like all the cultural changes that were happening in society at large.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the album, it pushed civil rights forward in a way, like maybe not like directly like Martin Luther King did, but like it's getting a culture to like embrace something that like they wouldn't normally, because you have a black person singing, you know, white country songs.
Yeah. Well, you know, when Charles first announced he was going to work on the country record, everyone from fellow R&B musicians to the label execs at ABC, they were all telling him not to do it. I mean, immediately they were like, "Do not," you know, because to them they were only seeing the politics of it, and
How
they
it might
just
not be a good career move.
Yeah, they just felt it would be a lot of pushback, and it was just going to kind of like impose too many threats to the social norms of the time.
Yeah.
And so, but it's interesting because Charles was more concerned about kind of testing the relationship with the label, because he was trying to get
creative control.
He really wanted freedom to be able to do what he wanted to do.
The music that he wanted to record. And this was the first one.
Yeah. So, you know, I don't think his goal wasn't to necessarily challenge anything
or stir the pot.
Not the civil rights pot.
Sure.
Yeah. He wanted to stir the music industry pot.
Yes.
So,
yes.
But the interesting thing is there's so many parallels between those two that both end up impacting the other.
It did, yes.
Yeah. So, because, you know, one of the things that I read was that Charles didn't see the separation between genres of music as this big barrier that many others did.
Yeah.
He kind of just saw music as this unifying thing. And so for him,
there may be different styles.
Yeah,
but
he didn't even like the separation of genre. Like he totally was like, I can totally take these country songs and make them you know, pop and R&B.
Have R&B, yeah.
Yeah. And so it was interesting because he did an interview with Rolling Stone, and he spoke about the similarities that he saw between R&B and country music. And I'm going to paraphrase it because I couldn't, if I try to sound like him, I mean, he just spoke like in this totally hip way. Like he'd say things like, you know, country songs are very earthy and like the blues, see, very down. You know, like this is the way his phrase was. But basically what he said was that he thought, you know, country didn't dress up their lyrics, and blues didn't either. You know, they spoke about real things. So if he sang a song that said, "Look, I miss you, darling," and I went out and got drunk in this bar, like he said, that's just real talk.
It was a literal
he
statement.
Says, and there are certain places where you would clean it up and be like, "Oh, I missed you, so I went to a restaurant and sat down and had a dinner for one." And he goes, and they're basically saying the same thing, but it's a cleaned up version where the rest of us that talk real talk, that's how countries and blues, rhythm and blues talks. And so he saw a lot of like similarities between those two formats from a lyric standpoint. Which is
great.
Yeah. You know, the success of the album started bringing in white fans to his traditional black audience as well. And the great thing was he didn't lose any of his black audience. So, you know, for the time, a Ray Charles show was basically like this massively inclusive experience.
Yeah.
And, you know, in another article that I found from Rolling Stone, it stated that modern sounds in country and western music made it acceptable for black people to sing country and western music, and in the process doing almost as much to break down racial barriers as did the civil rights movement. You know, without a doubt, this is an important album. But on top of that, his singles kept doing well. So the biggest single off this album, hands down, was I Can't Stop Loving You, which was the third single released. It went to number 1 on Billboard Hot 100 for 5 weeks. It was number 1 on R&B, number 1 on Adult Contemporary, and number 1 on the UK singles chart.
Amazing.
So Billboard ranked it at the end of that year as the number 2 song of the year on the charts. So, you know, it was originally a hit for country singer Don Gibson, but Charles' version was much, much bigger. So let's listen to Charles sing that song now. This is I Can't Stop Loving You.
I've made up my mind to live in memories of the lonesome time. I can't stop wanting you. It's useless to say, so I'll just live my life in dreams of yesterday. Those happy hours.
So, you know, on top of the historical cultural significance of Charles making this album, it also held historical significance within the music industry. The success of this album did allow Charles to negotiate a deal with ABC Paramount. Without getting into the weeds of the New Deal, the big takeaway from all of this is that Charles became one of the first African-American musicians to be given complete control over his own recordings. It led to more ownership, higher royalties, and eventually allowed him, like literally later that year, it allowed him to own his own label distributed and promoted by ABC Paramount called Tangerine Records. That label ran from 62 to 73 until he left ABC Paramount.
Wow. Opened a lot of doors.
Well, he started signing other artists. You know, like the Ohio players. I mean, you can go look at the list of people that were on Tangerine Records, but he just started opening the doors for a lot of other artists.
And New Discovery.
And he had complete creative control. Nobody told Ray Charles how to sing or what songs to do or any of that.
Change this part or...
You know, the album at the time released to mostly positive reviews and praise from critics pretty much in all genres. I mean, even country, you know, critics were giving high marks to the record.
Yeah.
I Can't Stop Loving You earned Charles a Grammy for Best R&B Recording in '63. The album itself was nominated for Album of the Year but didn't win. But as time has moved on, you know, the album has become revered. In 1999, it was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame, along with the song I Can't Stop Loving You. The album appears on most critics' greatest albums list. You can look at big lists from like CMT's 40 greatest albums in country music. It's number 2.
Wow.
It's number 104 on Rolling Stone's 500 greatest albums of all time, which is, you know, a list we reference a lot.
I love that list.
And it was on, like, Time Magazine had a top 100 albums of all time, and it was on that list. I mean, it's on a ton I mean, most time if people are compiling an albums list, this, just like talking about the Beatles, this is one of those albums you talk about.
You always mention this one.
Yeah. So the last single off this album was a song called You Don't Know Me. That song went number 2 on Billboard Hot 100, number 5 on R&B, and number 1 on AC, and number 9 in the UK. The song was originally recorded by Eddie Arnold in 1955, and once again, this version was the biggest success. Here's Charles doing You Don't Know Me.
You give your hand to me, and then you say hello, and I can hardly speak. My heart is beating so, and anyone can tell. You think you know me well, but you don't know me. No, you don't know me. No, you don't know the one who dreams of you at night and longs to kiss your lips and longs to hold you tight. Oh, I'm just a friend, that's all I've ever been, 'cause you don't know me. No, you don't know me.
So we've talked about the historical importance both on culture and the music industry, but the album also had a huge impact specifically on country music. Once this album blew up the way it did, there was an immediate increase in the popularity of country music. I mean, it literally impacted the entire format.
Yeah.
And that's the crazy thing was because he wasn't doing these songs country.
Yeah. But why would it impact that genre?
Yeah,
That's pretty funny.
It's been noted that it specifically influenced the profile of Nashville sound.
Very interesting.
So, when living here in Nashville now, all these years later, and kind of thinking back to this time frame, it's pretty crazy to think that this album literally elevated the entire music infrastructure
So
here.
awesome. And to think that some of that was done right down the street from here somewhere.
Well, by the end of 1962, Nashville publishers were the most popular source of music material in the music industry. It was like, that's where everybody thought the hot cuts were.
Yep.
And so
Move over, Brill Building.
the successful fusion of country and R&B that Ray did on this, it led to similar projects. There were artists like Candy Stanton and Solomon Burke that tried to do more R&B driven country music.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also find interviews, even from guys like Willie Nelson, that talk about the influence of hearing Charles's versions, how that impacted the way they wanted to interpret some of their songs moving forward. And so it literally, like, the impact was going both ways. So the first time I heard Ray Charles sing country, for me, it was when the Country Music Hall of Fame several years ago had a Ray Charles exhibit. And I went to that exhibit. It was amazing. But the display that floored me was this clip of Ray Charles performing on the Johnny Cash show. It was 1970, and Cash was kind of at the height of that TV show. And he introduced him, and as cool and calm as Cash always is, he almost seemed to me giddy.
Like starstruck a little bit.
Just happy that Ray Charles was on a show, and he's sitting at the piano talking about, hey, last time you were here in Nashville, you told me about this song you wanted to do. What was it? And Ray's just sitting there with this huge smile on his face, and he's like, it's Ring of Fire.
Oh, nice.
I'm going to do Ring of Fire. And Johnny just smiled and got up and walked away. And, man, I'd never heard Ray Charles's version of Ring of Fire until I was at that exhibit at the museum. And it floored me.
Yeah.
I'm a big Johnny Cash fan. I mean, one of my kids is named after Johnny Cash. That version of Ring of Fire, hands down, the best recording of that song ever done. And you could see Johnny was smiling from ear to ear. Like after he got done playing, he was sitting there, because I think Johnny knew.
Yeah.
And I don't think he minded. I think he loved that what Ray Charles could do with a song that had been, for the most part, interpreted the way Johnny in June, had done it all that. And then here comes Ray Charles with this thing. And I mean, if you haven't heard that, you need to look it up. It is amazing. But I just think it kind of shows how that for the better part of a decade, like the way that R&B and country was kind of merging during that time, and everybody kind of trying on each other's style, and everybody loved it. It was great.
Kind of happening again right now.
I think this album is an absolute vinyl standard.
This is one of those ones you have to own.
If you are a vinyl collector, for sure, but honestly, if you're a collector in any format, this is just a must-have album.
Yeah, this was in the collection given to me by my stepdad forever ago. It's a collection, or it's a record that was in his.
Well, I don't think there's enough you can say about this record, but if you haven't spent some time with it, you need to immediately put it on your list of albums to hear. Again, this one is the original version that we have this month for our subscribers.
It's pressed on standard black.
A reissue of the original version, I should say, but it's got the original 12 tracks. So as you're looking this up online to kind of see what albums are out there, this is the one that we have.
And it's definitely the original album art.
Yep, it is, without any of the add-ons. So let's talk about our classic rock record of the month. We're going to go on to our second icon for this month's picks, and this is Van Morrison and the album Moondance.
Van the man.
So Van Morrison, or you can also call him Sir Van Morrison since he was knighted a few years ago, he began singing in the late 50s in Northern Ireland. And since that time, he's become a rock and roll legend and is every bit an American artist as he is an Irish or English artist, however you want to consider it. In 1967, Morrison released his first album, Blowin' Your Mind. And right out the gate, Morrison charted it at number 182 on Billboard 200. And the album included his first major hit, Brown Eyed Girl. That single went number 10 at AC and eventually became a classic rock and oldies staple. You know, we talked about this a little bit when we talked about, you know, bands like Steve Miller Band, but they're Brown Eyed Girls, if you look at classic rock playlists, you're going to see that as one of the all-time played classic songs.
Yeah.
In 2005, Morrison received a millionaire certificate by BMI as a top European writer for reaching 7 million U.S. radio and television airplays for Brown Eyed Girl. So then again in 2007, he was awarded again by BMI for 8 million airplays, and then in 2009 for 9 million airplays, and it just kept going. In 2011, he became one of 10 BMI songs that have 10 million U.S. plays. I mean, that's, you know, now almost a decade ago.
Yeah,
so
I would say that number is exponentially bigger now.
Yeah, so he's, you know, clearly one of the all-time played songs in the U.S.
Yep.
Morrison, I've read in multiple places where they've interviewed him. He just doesn't even really like the song. But, you know, and sometimes that's how things go when somebody has a big hit. I think
it's their least favorite.
And it was on his first album. I mean, there's probably a lot to it, but the thing is, like, the success of that song led to Morrison relocating to the U.S., and then eventually later that year he got a contract with Warner Brother Records where he recorded, you know, basically his two biggest career-defining albums, which is Astral Weeks and Moondance.
Yeah.
Astral Weeks was released in 1968, and it's considered one of the greatest albums of all time pretty much by every major music critic you can imagine.
Yeah.
Even though it's only been certified gold by the RIAA, it's been on every albums list that I can find. I mean, Time Magazine had it on their all-time 100 albums. It's number 19 on Rolling Stone's 500 greatest albums of all time. And according to Acclaim Music, it's the 15th most ranked record of all time by critics. So
really hard to believe that it's only gold certified with all that.
After all these years.
Yeah.
I mean...
that kind of doesn't make sense. It's like they stopped counting.
we could do pretty much an entire podcast probably just on artists that are influenced by Van Morrison, like people that have vocalized that. But famously, Bruce Springsteen, I think, was one of the early, like, most outspoken. I read, and I think it was Steve Van Zandt said that listening to that album, it was like a religion to them when they were recording their first record, Greetings from Asbury Park.
That's awesome.
So, and I mean, you can, you know, if you research and just look up Van Morrison's career, like, you're just going to find constantly, like, artist after artist that kind of references him, especially during that time frame, like right after Astral Weeks and eventually Moondance, when those albums were out. It's almost like he affected artists more than he did consumers, because commercially they were not huge.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, I get what you're saying.
You know, in 1970, Van Morrison released Moondance, and it went number 29 on Billboard 200 and number 32 in the UK. So it's been certified 3 times platinum in the US. The first single, and ironically the only song to chart, was Come Running. It peaked at number 49 on the Hot 100, so it didn't even make it into the top 40.
Yeah.
The next song released was Crazy Love. This did not chart in 1970, but in 2004, Ray Charles and Van Morrison performed it as a duet, and it went to number 12 on AAA. So,
that's awesome.
You know, I think you're going to see this as we talk about this record, both this record and Astral Weeks, highly appreciated by critics and artists at the time, did not do that well at radio and with consumers.
I saw Moondance the song Moondance didn't chart until 7 years after the release of this album. So 70 until 77, Moondance finally charts as a song.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then, when you think about the impact this record still had, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And so
go through the singles.
So let's listen to the original version of that song I was mentioning, Crazy Love, not the one with Ray Charles. Let's listen to, which I think is kind of funny too, because we just talked about Ray Charles.
We did.
But let's listen to Van Morrison's version. This is Crazy Love off the album Moondance.
I can hear her heartbeat from 1,000 miles. Yeah, the heavens open every time she smiles. And when I come to her, that's where I belong. Yet I run into her like a river song. She gave me love, 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 crazy love. She gave me love, 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 crazy love. She got a fine sense of humor.
Well, so that was Crazy Love, and what's kind of crazy is that once again, you know, this album is considered one of the greatest albums of all time, but it produced no radio charting singles to note.
It doesn't make sense.
So the other thing, you know, I mentioned it's gone 3 times platinum, so it has sold 3 million copies, but that's over a long period of time.
Yeah,
we're talking 40 years.
Yeah. I'm getting mad now, honestly.
So, and the other thing I will point out is that Astral Weeks, Moondance, no awards, like no recognitions from
No
the
Grammys,
Grammys,
no
no
anything.
nothing. I mean, at the time,
Sure.
I mean, since then we're going
A
to talk
lot
about
have,
that, but
yeah.
I mean, nothing.
But no acclaim upon release for any of these.
No. So let me back up just a little bit, real quick. You know, we talked about Brown Eyed Girl, you know, which that was his first single that he had put out since Gloria in 1964, which was a big hit for his band Them, which Van Morrison was the frontman for.
Yeah, you just blew my mind.
So in 1999, the song Gloria and the album Astral Weeks was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. In 2007, Brown Eyed Girl and Moondance, the album, were inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame, which I guess is a way of kind of saying, hey, sorry we missed you at the time, but now we're going to recognize how ridiculously impactful all of this was.
We're sorry.
Yeah, and so you've got literally from that last hit that he did with them, all the way, you know, through Brown Eyed Girl, through Astral Weeks, through Moondance, all getting recognition at the Grammys, but we're talking decades later.
Yeah, decades.
Also, Brown Eyed Girl and the Moondance, the song, not the album, they also were selected for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's 500 songs that shaped rock and roll. So just a list that's there at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame of, you know, the most important songs in their view in the history of music, and both of those songs are on there.
It's funny to hear that Moondance is in there as like jazzy and like loungy
Yeah.
as it is, but at the same time, it deserves to be in there. First time you hear Moondance is kind of a special time. I feel like.
Yeah. So, you know, again, kind of like Astral Weeks, the album Moondance finds its way to a lot of critics' lists when it
Into
came out
canon or
and
whatever,
polls, you know, like all-time
Post,
lists,
yeah.
like by critics.
Yeah.
So same list, Time Magazine 100 Greatest Albums, this album's on it as well. Rolling Stone's Greatest 500 Albums, this one's at number 65.
Yep.
And again, according to Acclaim Music, this is the 102nd highest ranked song by critics of all time. And the song Moondance, you know, that was also on Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Songs of All Time at number 226. Gloria and Brown Eyed Girl are also on that list. So whether you're looking at songs or these albums, we're just continuing to see that as time went on, massive recognition.
Yep.
So in 2007, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame named Moondance the album. They named it number 72 in their definitive 200 albums. So, you know, again, I mean, all across the board, anywhere you look, you're going to find this album,
It's
just
gonna
like
be there.
Astral Weeks. It's going to be there. So let's go ahead and play one of the songs that we've been talking about a little bit. Let's go ahead and play Moondance. This is Moondance off of Moondance.
Well, it's a marvelous night for a moon dance with the stars up above in your eyes. A fantabulous night to make romance neath the cover of October skies. You know the leaves on the trees are falling to the sound of the breezes that blow. You know I'm trying to please to the calling of your heartstrings that play soft and low. You know the night's magic seem to whisper and hush You know the soft moonlight seems to shine in your blush. Can I just have one more moon dance with you, my love? Can I just make some more romance with you, my love? Will I wanna make love to you too?
Just like we talked about with Astral Weeks, this album is also a massive influencer on other artists. And as influential as Astral Weeks was at the time, Moondance pretty much defined Morrison in the public consciousness for decades. Like even though the album didn't have any real charting singles, as we mentioned, when it was released, so many of these tracks became staples, just like Brown Eyed Girl. They became staples at formats like oldies and classic rock and other adult, oriented rock formats, like even easy listening or soft rock. As we've gone through the years and some of these formats have changed. I mean, some of these songs off of Moondance, they're just, again, played. So, this album, probably more than anything that he's done, really defined Morrison in the public consciousness as to like what he was, what kind of artist he was.
Yep.
I'd say this and Brown Eyed Girl.
I get that. I feel like this is definitely like Moondance. The album is really like kind of I would say that it's his masterpiece in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, in many ways, it was one of the adult formats almost defining albums. They started some of these easy listening formats when they were kind of starting in the early 70s to transition into some of these artists like James Taylor or Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, even Paul McCartney, like all of these things. I mean, this album was almost like a precursor to what was going to become a really dominating sound, in the early mid 70s, in pretty much until we've kind of gotten to a lot of rock and disco in the late 70s.
Late 70s,
and so,
early 80s.
So I mean that again, I mean, I think like this album, even though Astral Weeks, some people kind of say, hey, that's like
the Van Morrison album right
there.
It's
It's like you'll see it higher on critics' lists. Let's just say that. Like they're critically will say that was the masterpiece.
What's more accessible between the two?
Was the defining masterpiece. Mm-hmm. Like this is what he's known mostly for.
Yeah.
I think like honestly, like I think the next big album he has is No Guru, No Teacher, as far as like another one that kind of and I think that was 86.
I was going to say, you're talking 10, 15 years later.
That's probably the next one where everyone's like, whoa. And really, it's kind of like in the late 80s, early 90s is when he actually starts winning some Grammys and things like that for those albums.
And you feel like that's where the recognition is finally like, it's there finally.
Yeah. Well, and some of the tracks that we were mentioning that were never even singles that started getting played at some of these formats, there's songs like Caravan. Another one was And It Stoned Me. Which has become a huge mainstay at adult radio. As a matter of fact, let's play that one next. This is And It Stoned Me off of Moondance.
Half a mile from the county fair, and the rain came pouring down. Me and Billy standing there with a silver £half. Hands are full of a fishing rod and the tackle on our backs. We just stood there getting wet with our backs against the fence. Oh, the water. Oh, the water. Oh, the water. Hope it don't rain all day. And it stung me to my soul. Stung me just like Jelly Roll. And it stung me. Yet it stung me to my soul.
So, we already mentioned that Astral Weeks, obviously, these albums were critically acclaimed later, but when released, they were considered failures. Especially Astral Weeks. I mean, you had this like folk style mixed with jazz, like nobody had ever heard that kind of that mixture before, and it just didn't connect with consumers. That's just the bottom line.
Not
and
quite as accessible, basically.
Yeah, and so when they were going in the studio to make Moondance, there really was an attempt to make a more commercial album. Like that was intentional. Like they originally, when they started the record, and I think they even tracked a song, I don't know if it made it on the record, but they had brought in the same players from Astral Weeks.
Yep.
He said no.
Didn't he fire the whole band?
He fired everybody, and he started over, brought in different players, because a lot of those players were largely jazz-influenced players, and even though he still has this jazz stuff going on in Moondance, he wanted guys that kind of had studied another technique.
Yeah.
And so he got rid of like kind of the jazz players. He still had a horn section, but he used them really in a much different way, I think, than you would like a traditional jazz musician might think to use
So much
them.
more complimentary than anything.
He had also let Warner Brothers know, his label, he basically that he was going to step into the producer role on this. He wanted to control the recordings more, and they had tried a couple of different producers, but every time that they sent, and I think the producers were still in the room, like Warner Brothers would still be like, well, this guy's your producer.
Yeah.
But they were basically relegated to basically assistant production roles as soon as they got in there, because Morrison wanted to control this record.
You had the vision already.
You know, so Moondance, this is really the first album where, well, this is the first album that Morrison's actually credited as the producer. So he didn't just like assume the role. Like he eventually, they gave it to him, they credited him with him, and if you look up the credits now, he's the producer.
Yes.
And there was a book that came out, I think it came out in the 70s by Richie York. It's called Van Morrison Into the Music. And Morrison is quoted in that book as saying that no one knew what I was looking for except me, so I just did it. Also in that book, it stated that all of kind of the tasteful frills, you know, which kind of some of these things we talk about, like the horn stuff, you know, things like that, all of these were really created spontaneously in the studio. Like Morrison would use whatever was happening in the studio to create this new thing. So,
and you
like,
gotta love that when you think about like Into the Mystic, the little horn sax thing that comes right after each chorus, and it's almost part of the chorus itself, the horn runs, and that's what I feel like. If that was created in the studio, that's amazing.
Well, most of it was spontaneous, and on top of that, almost all of his vocals are recorded live. So you kind of have this very much old school, almost like that was done all the time in R&B and things like that. Like he's in there kind of reading the room, seeing what the players bring in, but he's singing right over it, and they're kind of creating everything right there.
That's amazing.
And again, that's why I think he didn't want to produce, because he was saying, I have these things in my head. I know where I want to go, but I don't want to like piece it together. Like I just want to build it and do it. So yeah, one of the other things I mentioned in that book was that he really responded to everything that was happening in the room. Like some of the runs that you're mentioning, when he would hear some instrumentation and all that, it literally could even affect maybe the way he would vocally articulate that next line.
Yeah.
So they're not only creating in the room, but he's kind of like reading the room and using the room and every player in there like almost like on the fly, creating an orchestral piece that he's just kind of going with, And so I mean, I wanted to play next. I wanted to play Into the Mystic. I really think it shows like some of these horn elements we're talking about, like they're all in this song, and you can kind of see that there's horns, there's some traditional jazz stuff here, but this is not the same as Astral Weeks. Like it's definitely a big difference here. But this is a great song. I can just kind of picture him in that room, doing all the stuff that we're talking about. It almost is like you can hear it in this song. So this is Into the Mystic.
We were born before the wind, also younger than the sun. Yeah, the bonnie boat was one as we sail into the mystic. Hark now, hear the sailors cry. Smell the sea and feel the sky. Let your soul and spirit fly into the mystic. And where that foghorn blows, I will be coming home. Yeah, when the foghorn blows, I wanna hear it. I don't have to fear it, and I wanna rock your gypsy soul. Just like
So Van Morrison was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1993. He's recorded over 40 albums. The most recent was in 2018.
39 more than me.
Yeah, so through the 1990s, after another pivotal album that we mentioned earlier, No Guru, No Teacher, and then he did Avalon Sunset, which is one that I think produced a Grammy as well. that's when he started kind of snagging some of these
when
like
they were
current
regular,
recognition.
yeah.
Let's just call it that, because he definitely, but right in that time frame, I mean, he got a couple of Grammys, he got a Brit Award. I think there were some others. He also started to get Heritage Awards, for lack of a better word, like Songwriters Hall of Fame in 2003.
Oh, yeah.
He was in the Irish Music Hall of Fame in 1999. He got the BMI Icon Award in 2004, and he got a Lifetime Achievement Award for Songwriting in 2017 from the Americana Music Honors and Awards Association. So the bottom line is that Moondance is literally, a must-own vinyl for any collector. It's the same thing we said with, for the Ray Charles album.
This is one of the albums that you should own.
And, both of these guys, Van Morrison, for sure, he's one of the most important figures in music. And so, again, vinyl, must.
Yep.
Any other format, should.
Should, yeah.
Yeah. So, and we got a pretty cool version this time, too.
We got a limited edition orange pressing of this one. So this is a special reissue and one that you want to jump on if you don't have it already.
Yeah, I don't think they'll last long. I know once we go through them, I probably won't be able to get them again. Yep. And I doubt very seriously that they'll repress it in this color. So it's probably a one-time.
Yeah, this is a one-timer.
All right, well, let's talk about our last style, and this is our Discover category. Our Discover record of the month is a band called the Seratones and their new album, Power. So the Seratones is an alternative rock and soul band out of Louisiana. This band's really original.
This band is awesome. You hear it from the first track. It's got like the old school wall of sound drums, like the Phil Spector drums from the girl groups of old. I was like hooked on this album from this first song.
Yeah, it's crazy, all the, for lack of a better word, like influences you hear on this album.
For sure. They're everywhere.
In 2016, the band put out their first album. It was called Get Gone. They created a little bit of buzz off that first release. Paste Magazine had listed the band as on their top 20 new bands of 2015. They also had a song on that album called Chandelier, and it was named Best New Track by NME in 2016. Nice. So, I mean, they even made their way across the pond
I was going to say,
UK.
getting the claim across the pond.
So, they're now with our good friends at New West Records, and they just released their second album, Power. But it's been 3 years, which is pretty long gap between projects.
Yeah, for a newer band, for sure.
So, that first album was definitely more rock. I mean, it really is even kind of garage rock.
It's and it stands on its own.
It's good.
Yeah. But like, if you compare these two these releases,
totally different.
You're not even listening to the same band.
Yeah. So they went from that garage band sound. They were also only a quartet at that time.
Yes.
And they also had a member leave. So I think it was their guitarist. And so now they have a new guitarist. Then they added keyboards.
Yep.
So they present as a quintet now.
And the keyboard edition is really, really awesome here.
It's key.
Key, is it?
Yes.
Ding,
So,
ding, ding, ding.
So the album is different from the first album, but it's so like fresh and new to me. Let's just jump right in here. Let's go ahead and play a song. I wanted to play Power first, so let's play that and kind of introduce everybody to the Seratones if they haven't heard it. So, one of the biggest points of interest that should be an eye catcher to anyone that's paying attention is the producer on this album.
Who is it?
Bradley Schultz or Brad Schultz, whatever you want to call him. I've seen it in both. But he's the guitarist and one of the founding members of Cage the Elephant. There's two brothers in that band, Matt and Brad Schultz, and he's the guitarist. So he's also, coincidentally, the producer on our Discover album next month. but we haven't announced our October record
we
yet,
can't
so
tell
we
you
just
what
got to
that
keep
is.
that on the download. But that's a clue if you want to look it up.
Who could it be?
So next month we have another Brad Schultz record, produced record.
Which is funny. We're starting to say his name as much as we do Dave Cobb. If you really pay attention.
Yeah. So, I think what's really special about this band is the front woman, AJ Haynes.
Yep.
She has these really huge, powerful vocals, and her attack, kind of gives the songs these sounds that range literally all the way from rock. Like I hear some of these songs, like I feel like it's the Pretenders, and then you go all the way to like 1960s soul.
Yep. Absolutely.
There's even a song on here called Heart Attack that sounds like Deborah Harry to me from the 80s.
Very cool.
And again, we mentioned the keyboard player, like that, the addition. I really think it's allowing the band to experiment with some of these synth sounds.
Yep.
So
throwback.
Yeah,
kind
and
of
that
vibe.
so you take her vocal when she's kind of doing this different technique that you don't hear a lot of time being done anymore.
Yeah.
And then you add the synth in. I mean, it's really. It's to me, those are the two main drivers of this record, and one of the things that really differentiates it from the first album.
One. You wouldn't have someone like the vocal on this record has to be strong.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying,
yeah.
to match up with the music.
Yeah. Well, let's play Heart Attack because this is the one. I think this is a great representation of that synth sound, and see if it sounds like Deborah Harry to you.
Kiss me like a heart attack. Kiss me like a heart attack. Come on, illuminate me. Just close your eyes and count to 10. All of your ruminating will be a ruin in the end. I can hear the warning sign when you put your lips to mine.
So this band also has some songs that really kind of have funk in them. It kind of reminds. I mean, this may not be a great example, but it reminds me of something like De La Soul mixed with the B-52s.
Okay.
Like some kind of more like funk driven hip hop, but then you
And then
still
married to pop.
there's like something I can't quite put
pop
my
rock
finger
band,
on
yeah.
where they always feel like a little bit like 50s, 60s.
Yeah, because the
Music
B-52s
somewhere-
had that.
yeah, like
There's
it's
this
that
weird
thing.
underlying
Yeah.
50s tone to their 80s new wave.
I know it's just weird, but that's
you
I feel like
hear it.
Seratones has that thing going on.
I
on
hear
a lot
it
of
from
this
the
record.
first, like I said earlier, like that wall of sound drum sound that was like super prevalent in like the Supremes and the Ronettes and everything back in the day.
Yeah.
I hear that from the beginning.
I mean, honestly, probably B-52s or like the brand new heavies, like bands like that. That's probably decent comparisons for like what we're hearing with the Seratones on this record, except that it's super current and fresh. Like it's really an enjoyable record. One of my favorite tracks is a song called "Gotta Get to Know You." It's really like a funk driven song, and then there's a song called "Fear" that pulls more from that 60s soul pop that we've been talking about.
yeah,
It
that's
really,
the opener. Yeah, the album opener.
I think all in all, like even though this band kind of reminds me more of like a B-52s or Brand New Heavies, I think like as far as the space that they're carving out, they fit more in that category of like St. Paul's and Broken Bones, Leon Bridges, Nathaniel Rateliff and the Night Sweats, like things that some people call retro. Not that they sound anything like those bands, because they don't sound like those bands.
Yeah.
But I think it's that same space where there's these hints of old mixed in with the new, and then
Throwback
it becomes
sound.
Yeah, it's complete. It's not totally a throwback album, but it's got enough of it to where you want to kind of put it in that
There's
space.
an element, yeah.
Yeah.
It,
So
it reminds me of another band. It's a smaller indie band. It's just a guy and a girl that I don't know that any of our listeners, I feel like somebody's going to know, but if you've ever listened to a band called Cults, this band sounds very similar. It's got that 50s pop sensibility, 60s pop sensibility mixed with new pop rock. Like it's all there.
well, let's play another one. This will be the last one we play off this one. This is a song called "Fear," and I think this one you'll hear, exactly what Rudy and I were talking about with the 60s sound.
Maybe I'm selfish if I never come home. Maybe I'm reckless, got one foot at the door.
Longing for what I never had. I stepped in the water, and the water was cold. Shivered my body, but didn't worry my soul. Fear is the weight of the world coming down with no love in return. Fear is the weight of the world coming down.
All right, well, that wraps up the Seratones. They're in our Discovered Style pick for this month, and it really is a good record. It's just fun from first track all the way through.
Yeah, we got a really special version of this one from our friends at New West. They hooked it up this month. We've got a limited edition, autographed on the cover, translucent purple pressing.
Yeah,
So
really cool looking.
you'll want to check that out.
All right, well, those are all the records of the month that have been curated for our members in September. If you're just getting into vinyl, we also have great turntables, speakers, headphones, and other accessories, really anything you need to get started. If you want to find out more, just head to blindtigerrecordclub.com and go to the homepage, and you can read more about the records that we talked about on the show and also how to become a member. So until next time, keep the wax spinning.
For a dying man, I feel pretty good. I feel pretty good.